as we look at this passage, we're going to spend 2 weeks, this week and next week, talking about this idea of submission. And we're going to go a little bit more into submission next week. But it's interesting to me that when we look at this passage, between us and the first century church, we actually look at this verse in two opposite directions, or two reverse views. It is interesting to me that the purpose of this, when you typically read it or when you've heard a pastor repeat it back to you, I'm almost positive that that pastor has spoken about the fact that this is an example of what it looks like for a husband to love his wife. And we've always looked at it from this instance that we look at Jesus Christ as an example of how we should go about loving our wives. The interesting thing is, that's not how the first century would have heard this verse. That's not even what Paul says in this verse. In fact, Paul says, I'm telling you these things in verse 32, this mystery, because I'm trying to tell you what Christ does for the church. You see, the thing is we've gotten to the point in our society where we need a reminder of what it looks like to be a husband. We've gotten to the point in our society where we need a reminder what it looks like to be a wife. I'm telling you right now, they didn't need the reminder in first century AD. They knew what it meant like to be a husband or wife. And we are in the 21st century. We're going to get there, and we're going to look at this. We need a reminder. 21st century American Christians need a reminder about what it looks like to be a husband and wife, I assure you. But the first century here would have looked at this, and he's not trying to tell them how to live their lives or how to be a husband or a wife. They knew that. Paul is telling them, this is what Christ does for the church. He is giving them a theological understanding of what Jesus Christ is currently doing so that they can understand how they love Christ better. You got to remember, the Ephesians church is a church which didn't have the ministry of Jesus Christ. It is a church which exists in a Greek city, far away from the ministry of Jesus Christ. And they are, through the disciples, through Paul, through the church, learning what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus Christ. So when Paul says, I want you to submit to Jesus Christ, I want you to surrender yourself to the body of believers, I want you to be unified because you are under a new kingdom, everything that Paul has been saying through our study of Ephesians, whether that is kingdom terms, which we looked at a couple of weeks ago, you are a new citizen. Whether that is body terms, you are the hands and feet of Jesus. Whether that is husbands and wives, he is trying to reiterate what we as Christians should be about in response to what Christ has done. The whole point of Ephesians is to help us to understand what does it look like for us to actually submit to Jesus Christ as the head of the church. Well, how do we do that? It's just like in the relationship that you have between husband and wife. Because this is what Christ does with the church. And the early church needed an example to look at. And he gives them different physical examples to show them what it looks like to submit themselves to Jesus Christ. And one of the examples that he gives us here in this passage is just like a wife submits to her husband. But she doesn't submit to her husband out of blind obedience or fear. She doesn't submit to her husband out of cultural expectations. And she doesn't submit to her husband because her husband's somehow smarter than her. Ladies, let's be honest. Y'all met my wife, right? He's not saying you submit because somehow this person is more equipped or more prepared. The submission comes out of the husband's love for the wife. Love to the point of sacrifice. They would have understood this in the first century. The husband gives himself for his family. The husband gives himself for his wife. Don't you know that Christ gave himself for the church? Don't you know that Christ gives of himself to show you love? And what should the response of love be? The response to love should be resting in relationship, in which I am at peace in submitting to Jesus Christ because of his great love for me. That the more I feel loved, the more secure I am resting in the authority and in submission to someone else. Because I don't submit to them out of fear. I don't submit to them out of obligation. I submit to them out of love. So in verse 33, when it says that husbands love the wives as they love themselves, we see that it says no one hates themselves. They love themselves. They nurse themselves. They cherish themselves. And a husband loves his wife and cherishes his wife and provides for his wife. And Christ loves the church and provides for the church and nourishes the church. And it says that Christ does this so that he may present the church, in verse 26. That Christ is sanctifying the church, he is cleansing the church, washing with water, and in verse 27, so that he can present the church in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she would be holy and without blemish. Christ is loving the church so that that church can be an offering to the God who saved it. Christ is loving the church to the point where we are robed in majesty and splendor, more beautiful than any bride on their wedding day. That when we finally are unified with God in his throne room in heaven, we are presented in perfection as a result of Christ's love. And husbands, that is your task with your wives. To give of yourself, to build your wife up, so that she is presented to the Lord in splendor. It's not in this passage. There are other passages that talk about this same concept. And there are very few times in which our spiritual condition is directly impacted by our physical relationships. And there's actually a moment when we see the same conversation about husband and wives, and it says that if a husband is not doing this with his wife, it actually says that his prayers are hindered. There is a direct correlation to where husbands are supposed to be a reflection of Jesus Christ. And as a reflection of Jesus Christ, that is a responsibility that is of utmost importance. Next week, as we talk about this idea of submission and authority and responsibility, we're going to get a little bit into what it means when we talk about responsibility in association with authority. And though we don't have a whole lot of time today, and we don't have a whole lot of time to look at this verse, we're going to continue to look at this idea. But my question for you this morning, and what I want you to think about and pray about is, in what ways has Christ provided for you and nourished you and cleansed you and brought about splendor in your life? I want you to remember all the ways Christ has moved in your life up to this point. I want you to think of all those ways in which you have seen God work and move in a way in which you have nothing but understanding his love. And then my question for you is, how are you living in response to that? Are you submitting yourself to what God is doing? Is God calling you to something that you've been holding on to? Is God asking you to go out and to start something or do something or have a conversation? Is he moving in such a way and you're like, you know what, I've never done this before, I don't know what to do with this, but I feel like God is pushing this on me? Well, if God is pushing this on you, it's probably because he wants you to do it. And I guarantee you that if he wants you to do it, he's going to support you as you do it. I guarantee you that that same love and that same nourishment, that same provision that he's provided for you all those other times, he's going to provide for you. For some of you, maybe it's the fact that you've never really gone to a Bible study. You need to come out on Wednesday. That's your movement of faith this week. For some of you, maybe you've been holding on to some pain and some bitterness, and you might need to connect with somebody. You might need to join one of our support groups that are going to be starting up here pretty soon, in which people can share their burdens and they can share other people's burdens. It might be the fact that there's some ministry which God has been pushing on your heart and you've never had an opportunity. We're going to have different ministries starting up this spring of individuals who are starting groups to do different things. We're going to have a conversational Spanish evangelism class coming up. We've got grief share groups coming up. We've got counseling groups coming up. We have Bible studies on Sunday morning with our Sunday school. We've got Wednesday nights. We are creating opportunities for us to engage in the ministry, how God is pushing you. And maybe there's some ministry in which you need to present and you need to bring others along with you with. And I don't know what that is for you. But God is calling you towards something. And how can you submit yourself and surrender yourself to what God is calling you to do this week? And maybe you just need to sit down and we need to talk and we need to figure out what that is. But I would encourage you to surrender yourself to what God has for you this morning. Now, I know we haven't had a lot of time this morning, but I do want our ushers to prepare themselves to take up the offering. I also encourage you that if there is something you need to talk through, you need help in maybe figuring out what God is calling you to do. I encourage you to call the church this week, schedule a time with Ms. Desiree, come see me. Maybe you need to schedule time with somebody else. Maybe there's somebody here at the church that you have a relationship with that they can come alongside of you, they can help you with that. But there are opportunities for us to rest in God's love. There are opportunities for us to rest in what God is doing if we're willing to take a step into that. A couple of things as we are going this week. We want to encourage our ushers to come forward as we present our offering to God. There are many ministries that are starting and beginning here at Northway. We are very excited by that, and we are excited of what all Christ is going to be doing. As a result of that, as Dan mentioned, we're going to have a meeting next week after church. If you are able and you want to stick around, you have any questions about what's going on, we would encourage you to stick around next week so that we can communicate, we can talk. Anything that you guys need, we can do that next week after service.